Greetings all! Today, we are going to take a special look at the ground type and analyze its attributes, the Pokemon assigned to the type, and how it functions from a combative standpoint. While the ground type might be one that is fairly simplistic in its form and offers only a handful of attacks that can truly be considered devastatingly powerful, it is still a versatile type that is paired with many other types among Pokemon and can often be utilized by a large variety of Pokemon regardless of their overall anatomy. The Pokemon assigned to the type might be relatively pigeonholed for physical confrontations and have little in the way of special power to spare in many cases, but it is still a type that can consistently perform well in battle and help to shake up the competition in many cases. The earth below you may be made less than stable by their presence, to put it mildly, but with more offensive advantages against other Pokemon than nearly any other type, tied with the fighting type, it is still a type that is more than worth becoming familiar with, and maybe even using to one's advantage as a universal tool of destruction against the myriad array of types out there. The ground type is a unique type that is typically defined by a single unifying trait that is found universally across all that are assigned to it: an immunity to electrical attacks. While the general anatomy of all the Pokemon assigned to the type may differ substantially between different families and species, all of these creatures are alike in that their bodies naturally have a built-in path of least resistance that is capable of rerouting any electrical energy that enters their body and directing it outwards towards the ground or into the open air in rare cases. By acting as a self-ground, these biological pathways can help keep electricity from entering into vital muscles and affecting internal organs, leaving the creatures completely unharmed when struck with an electrical attack. This special attribute is unique because it is not one that is typically designed with this exact purpose in mind, but is almost always a consequence of a number of biological forms and activities that meld together in order to create this pathway and define the type's defensive attributes. As a result of this, a wide variety of different life forms are assigned to this type, and the implications that their type assignment has on their combat abilities can easily make or break them in the right circumstances. In addition to this, as a consequence of many Pokemon developing these attributes as a result of being associated with the ground in terms of their biology and lifestyle choices, these creatures typically command a certain level of control over the ground beneath them, and can use brute physical power to generate seismic events that can deal tremendous damage to other Pokemon with moves like Magnitude and Earthquake. Conversely, as far as special attacks go, these moves typically involve using energy derived from seismic attacks or something as simple as mud in order to blind and deal abrasive damage against other Pokemon. And since very few ground-type attacks require direct contact in order to execute, the type is a powerful weapon that can be used both up close and afar to deliver immense impacts against anything foolish enough to stay in the way of said attacks. Because the main defensive attribute of the ground type is one that arises primarily as a consequence of differing factors and not a specific adaptation, the type is assigned to a wide variety of different life forms, including mammals, arthropods, reptiles, various aquatic organisms, and so on, though mammals do make up a substantial portion of that pool. It is uncertain why this is the case, but at the very least, it is not an overwhelming presence, as the other types of organisms present show some considerable variety in themselves, such as the aquatic organisms assigned to the type being classified as fish, amphibians, and even gastropods, and thus the integrity of the type's variety remains intact. This helps to grant a greater variety of flavor in terms of both move options and type combinations among Pokemon assigned to the ground type, and thus helps it to become one of the most defensively versatile types out there, and in turn, a serious threat if one isn't packing the right Pokemon to handle them. As a consequence of the fact that many ground-type Pokemon have developed their electrical immunities independently through a myriad array of processes, their move variety is similarly versatile and can include a number of additional attributes depending upon the biology and type assignment of a ground-type Pokemon. In many cases, it is not at all uncommon to see the pairing of the rock type among the move sets of Pokemon assigned to the type, even if artificial assistance is needed to get them access to those types of moves. And even if they don't have a second type assigned to them, most ground types can gain natural access to a number of moves of varying elemental types, making the type surprisingly versatile from an offensive standpoint. This is especially helpful to these creatures when facing against the types of Pokemon they are normally weak against, as they generally have some way of countering these types as long as they have some sort of non-ground type offense that can be exploited, and thus their great move variety can make them some of the most dangerous opponents to have to face on the battlefield, and a true weapon of war when in the hands of someone who knows how to make the most of the Pokemon that are gifted with the natural properties of the ground type. In terms of stat averages, the ground type is one that focuses mainly on the physical traits and powers of Pokemon, and is noticeably vulnerable when it comes to dealing with special powers and mobility as a whole, which its average-based stats clearly reflect. As far as its weaknesses go, the ground type, despite having a number of special attacks assigned to it, is one mainly built for physical offense, and thus shows a lack of special prowess in the Pokemon assigned to it, and consequently, their resistance against said special offenses is highly limited. On that same note, these creatures tend to focus on bulk rather than mobility in many cases, which limits their movement speed in many families and, combined with the aforementioned special weaknesses, results in the type's average base special attack, special defense, and speed stats being below average compared to other types. On the upside, however, ground types are generally very hardy creatures that can make good use of their physical bodies and powerful long-range physical attacks like Earthquake, plus their stamina and capacity to take damage from physical attacks is a bit higher than one might otherwise expect, granting them above average base HP, attack, and defense stats. As such, the ground type is in a unique position where its best attacks still match its best offensive attributes despite being long range compared to the type's high base attack stat, and can thus prove to be useful in taking out special attackers that might aim to take advantage of the type's weaker special defenses and offenses, only to be nailed by a long-range strike that can cut through their physical defenses and render what advantages they might have relatively moot. Currently, there are 65 recognized types of ground-type Pokemon, 15 of them being pure ground types, and the remaining 50 being dual types, not counting Alolan Diglett and Alolan Dugtrio. Additionally, 17 of the dual types are primary ground types, while the remaining 33 are secondary ground types. They are broken down into the following categories. Mammals. These creatures are all unified by the fact that they are mammals, but while their basic body forms may share a similar anatomical plan for the most part, how they go about utilizing their ground-type powers differs significantly from each other. Some, like the members of the Sandshrew family and Nidoqueen and Nidoking, use their attributes in a more passive form for the most part, only regularly utilizing a scant few moves that match the attributes of their type, and instead relying on it more for defensive protection. Others, such as the members of the Hippopotas family, are completely dependent on their ground-type powers as their primary means of true offense. Regardless, they are mostly unified by a presence to remain above ground when needed in a fight, and only tend to dig when they need to escape a fight. But there are yet others still, like the members of the Diglett and Drillbur families, that are superb diggers, and can more than put their talents to good use, both in and outside of battle. Arthropods. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are all arthropods of some sort or another, and primarily rely on their ground-type attributes only in emergency situations or as a defensive measure, relying on secondary type-based moves as a substitute in battle. The only real exceptions to this are the members of the Trapinch family, who have their typing as a consequence of their lifestyle choices and reliance on the ground as a key part of their hunting strategies at a young age. This can make them a bit troublesome to work with, but their unique access to a wider variety of moves than expected can still help them out and provide them with a decently versatile moveset to work with under varying battle conditions. Aquatic organisms. These creatures are all unified by the fact that they all tend to live in the water to some degree or another, and have developed their ground-type attributes as a consequence of their choice to dwell in the muddier parts of bodies of water. While they come in many forms, including fish, amphibians, and gastropods, their lifestyle choices have done them a favor, as while their type combinations might make them highly vulnerable to grass-type assaults for the most part, they nonetheless make them immune to electricity, and thus takes care of one of the few weaknesses that the water type has. The only exception to this is Stunfisk, who have completely lost their water type attributes as a result of relying more on mud and their electrical powers as their primary means of survival. Reptiles and dragons. These creatures are all unified by the fact that they are all reptiles or dragons of some form or another. These entities tend to be incredibly brutish and vicious in their mannerisms, and can be a handful to take care of in many cases, thus requiring special care in order to maintain control over them. Tyranitar would normally be a great fit, but they lose their resistance to electrical attacks in a fully evolved state, hence their exclusion from this category. It is further noted that the members of the Gibble family and Zygarde, which has its own special category, are the only reptile-like creatures that are also considered to be dragons, helping to make them even more dangerous than the rest of their reptilian counterparts. Animated stone. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are all mainly made out of stone with very little organic tissue in their bodies, Golem being the only substantial exception to this rule. These creatures typically feed on rocks and some minute amounts of organic material in order to keep their bodies intact and constantly regenerating to account for the chipping away of their body form over time, extracting what phytonutrients and minerals they possibly can from the materials. It is uncertain how these types of organisms even ever came to be, but it is likely that they are the remnants of early forms of land-based organic life that adapted to using inanimate materials as a base to house their limited organic matter within, something that helps define them anatomically, as their brain and digestive systems are often the only substantial sources of organic tissue that are fully formed and functional within their entire body. Automatons. These creatures are unified by the fact that they are all automatons of artificial creation, though the manner in which they were created and what they specialize in differs substantially. The members of the Baltoy family were originally created when clay dolls were exposed to an abnormal form of psychic energy that granted them sentience, and while they do have access to some interesting special attacks, they are more defensive than anything else and work best as tactical fighters. The members of the Golett family, on the other hand, are the result of clay automatons being powered and granted sentience by an abnormal form of energy that is poorly understood but seemingly grants these creatures the attributes of the ghost type, something completely unseen among other automatons, and as a consequence of their design, they specialize in pure brute force and more than have the power needed to back this specialization up. Spiritual. This special category is reserved for the members of the Sandygast family, which are born as the result of sand piles and sand castles being possessed, formed from the coalescence of the regrets and sense of abandonment left by their creators into a sentient mind. While they are able to use some ghost-type powers in battle, they are surprisingly diverse in gaining access to many ground and even grass-type attacks as well, even getting access to their signature move, Shore Up, which can recover their energy and works more effectively in the presence of a sandstorm. While their bodies may be seemingly weak and easily destroyed, they are surprisingly strong on the defensive side, and are more than capable of using moves like Hypnosis to trick the opposition into helping them recover lost energy and body mass, making them far more dangerous than they might otherwise appear. Plants. This special category is reserved for Torterra, which act as the only true plants that possess ground-type attributes. This is more of a defensive byproduct than anything else, as their electrical immunity comes as a result of the soil and tree on their back acting as an electrical ground that absorbs any electricity launched at these creatures and instantly transfers it to the soil itself or into the ground beneath them. Moreover, their offensive ground-type attributes are also a consequence of their size, as their immense weight allows them to rear up on their hind legs and stomp the ground with incredible force, granting them access to the earthquake attack immediately upon evolving from Grotto. Force of Nature. This special category is reserved for Landorus, the legendary deities of fertility and prosperity, who possess their ground-type powers likely as a direct result of their association with the fertility of the soil of the earth and their ability to turn even barren wastelands into flourishing paradises. This is not just for a defensive show, however, as these creatures are more than capable of naturally utilizing a number of ground and rock type attacks to pummel anything that dares to challenge them. The only thing that really holds these creatures back is the lack of special attacks, which is a shame as they have the highest base special attack stat out of all ground type Pokemon, Mega Evolutions not included, but are otherwise a terrifying force of nature to have to go up against. Supercontinental. This special category is reserved for Groudon, an entity said by some to be the greatest natural terrestrial life form to ever exist, and a creature believed in Hoenn mythology to have been responsible for the creation of the land from the evaporation of the ocean, which makes some sense in light of its drought ability and immense physical strength. While its drought ability alone clearly shows its extreme control over the climate, the unstoppable desolate land ability of its primal form fully demonstrates its power and its capacity to vaporize everything on the planet with solar energy within the span of a few weeks or even days. Living in quiet isolation for the vast majority of its life, Groudon may have a type disadvantage against its partner in legend, Kyogre, but it has access to numerous attacks like Eruption and Solar Beam that can devastate all kinds of land and water-based organisms. In conjunction with its massive physical strength, this makes Groudon a true monster that only the boldest and strongest of trainers should ever seek out. Moreover, Groudon is known to clash with Kyogre frequently and naturally creates intense heat that serves to weaken its ocean-based rival. Such fights are intense enough to lead to utter terrestrial and planetary destruction, but these fights are usually always broken up by Rayquaza, which serves as the only life form that truly has complete dominance over both Kyogre and Groudon. Lord of Order. This special category is reserved for Zygarde, the appropriately titled Lord of Order, and a creature that uses its amazing powers to maintain ecological balance in the world against the face of potential global catastrophes. Zygarde is unique in that it is actually comprised of 100 individual components known as Zygarde cells and Zygarde cores, and although the cores at least have a sense of sentience to them, they have no ability to attack on their own, and are not even considered to be functioning Pokemon while in this state. When they gather together into large numbers, however, they can take on new forms as Zygarde, with different stats and appearances, though the moves they have possession of and can learn stay the same. As more cells gather together, the creature can progress from a 10% form to a 50% form, which is the Zygarde form that most are familiar with and the form the creature normally dwells in. However, should a major crisis erupt that threatens the very existence of the world and/or many innocent lives, if the power can be obtained, it is possible for all 100 cells and cores to join together to form Zygarde's complete form, where it has access to its full power. It is said in legend that it used this power in ancient times in order to control the forces of Xerneas and Yveltal in the Kalos region, and it will continue to save lives and protect the balance between life and death, creation and destruction, so the world may not suffer under the blinding light of only one side of the equation. In looking at the ground type's advantages and disadvantages in battle, in terms of offense, the ground type has 5 advantages, 2 disadvantages, and 1 negative immunity. The type is at an advantage against the poison type because, while poison types are generally resistant against their own kinds of attacks because of the toxic concoctions their bodies naturally produce, many species in turn possess volatile chemicals within their poisons that can be disturbed by seismic activity or the application of ground-based substances as projectile attacks. If disturbed, these volatile compounds can ignite or otherwise be triggered in a manner that can cause severe physical damage to a poison type's organs and interior structure, in turn amplifying the damage done to them by ground type attacks to the point of being potentially lethal. The type is at an advantage against the fire type because fire types, much like poison types, often have volatile chemicals stored in their body that are used either as the fuel source for or the cause of ignition. in their case, while these chemicals are normally unaffected by psychic-type attacks in comparison to the volatiles contained within poison types, due to differing chemical properties and resultant purposes, they can still be ignited through other means, such as through sudden physical shocks triggered either through seismic waves or through gritty, mud-based attacks. As such, these creatures show an inherent weakness to these types of attacks and can be readily taken down by them if they are lacking strong defenses or otherwise do not have some sort of partial type assignment that can reduce or eliminate the damage dealt by ground-type attacks altogether. The type is at an advantage against the rock type because rocky armor in general tends to be relatively inflexible, so when great shearing stress is delivered to said armor, it usually has little ability to maintain its form. The vibrational effects of moves like magnitude and earthquake in turn can help to shake apart this armor, while projectile attacks can help use mud to abrade away the rocky armor of rock-type Pokemon and compromise it, in turn working to severely weaken the opposition and leave them highly vulnerable to further attacks. The type is at an advantage against the electric type because electric-type Pokemon, when using electric-type attacks, typically experience somewhat of a feedback loop that can result in their power returning to them to keep them at least partially charged after using said attack. This is designed as such because they often rely on electricity as both a defensive measure and as something to keep their bodies going, and they can become extremely weak if this power is drained from them rapidly. When these creatures are hit by a ground-type attack, it acts to both introduce a ground into the equation and create a rearrangement of charges in their body that forces them to discharge their stored energy, with the power being absorbed either through mud or the earth below them, and thus severely weakens them in the process. This is the only type vulnerability that the electric type has, and thus serves as the pinnacle offensive power of the ground type, and one that is truly the bane of nearly every electric type Pokemon out there. The type is at an advantage against the steel type because, much as with rocky armor, metallic armor is generally inflexible and is thus highly vulnerable to shearing forces when they are applied to it. As such, strong vibrations from seismic attacks can readily compromise metallic armor, while the abrasive nature of ground-type special attacks can wear away at the armor and help to weaken it and the Pokemon it is attached to as a whole. The type is at a disadvantage against the grass type because, as a result of grass types often being able to plant themselves into the ground strongly, or otherwise having a dominion of sorts over the earth below them, they are not as vulnerable to the effects of seismic waves or ground-based projectiles, thus granting them extra protection against the damaging qualities of ground-type attacks. The type is at a disadvantage against the bug type because there seems to be an inherent link between the earth and these creatures, possibly due to the land-dwelling nature of many bug types, using the earth as both a home and a source of nutrition in some cases. This has rendered them resistant against seismic attacks and moves in general that involve the earth in some way, showing a level of dominance that is exhibited by few other types. Lastly, the type has no effect against the flying type because many ground-type attacks rely on seismic waves to deal damage, and in turn have little to no effect on Pokemon that naturally spend much of their time above the surface of the ground. The extreme maneuverability of these Pokemon in the air also serves to enable them to readily dodge incoming ground-type attacks that involve alternate ways of dealing damage, making it nearly impossible to strike them regardless of how accurate the user of a ground-type attack might be. Defensively speaking, the ground type has 2 resistances, 3 weaknesses, and 1 immunity. The type is resistant against the poison type because ground types tend to possess bodies with skin or hide that is designed to create a barrier between them and the outside world that protects them from biological toxins. Though seemingly counterintuitive, being dirty is actually a good thing in this case, as it creates a physical barrier to pathogens and toxins in general and keeps them from easily seeping through the skin and hide to do harm to ground types, reducing the amount of poison that actually enters into their systems, and in turn weakening the damage of poison-type attacks as a whole. The type is resistant against the rock type, as ground types typically have some sort of natural, thick skin or hide that is able to flex and more easily absorb kinetic impacts from blunt force attacks. Since rock-type physical attacks are designed to use powerful blunt force strikes in order to deliver bone-crushing blows, This resistant outer hide or skin helps to reduce the damage dealt by these types of attacks in the process. As far as special attacks go, the outer skin or hide of these same Pokemon tend to be able to reflect the abnormal energy waves used in rock-type special attacks, helping to reduce the damage dealt overall by said blows. The type is weak against the grass type because the vast majority of grass-type Pokemon are designed to be able to use roots or some other natural body part to wedge their bodies into the ground, even to the point of cracking apart bedrock as they embed themselves into its surface. This same ability can be used on ground-type Pokemon, as their bodies are often primed for these sorts of processes to be able to break through their hides. This further applies to energy-based grass-type attacks, as the natural energies can break down the surface of a ground-type's hide or armor, and in turn deal severe damage to them. The type is weak against the water type because the bodies of ground-type Pokemon are often designed to be able to absorb and retain moisture to an exceptionally effective degree, or to repel it as much as possible in the case of Pokemon whose natural bodies are vulnerable to the effects of chemical breakdown from water. While they can get a little wet and still be fine, the forceful power of most water-type attacks are able to oversaturate their bodies and lead to a host of internal complications that can deal severe damage to them in a short period of time. As such, the Pokemon assigned to the ground type tend to avoid water at all costs, and only come into contact with it either indirectly through their food or as drinking water, and can be so afraid of the substance that they might avoid battling against water types altogether if possible, even to the point of sometimes disobeying the orders of their trainers out of fear for their safety. The type is weak against the ice type because many ground types live in semi-arid conditions and environments where they are able to handle hot temperatures to at least some degree, but will often hide when the cold comes to avoid dealing with it and how sluggish it can make them. This directly translates into their typing, and thus a weakness to frigid ice-type attacks, but it is further noted that, in a more general sense, frozen water still has the eroding capabilities that liquid water has, and thus can deal damage in a similar fashion as the water type against ground-type Pokemon. Lastly, the type is immune to the electric type because, as mentioned before, Pokemon assigned to the ground type naturally possess a biological path of least resistance in their body that helps to redirect electrical energy that enters into their body away from their muscles and vital organs, allowing them to turn their bodies into living grounds when on the earth below them or even in the air. As such, no matter how strong the attack might be, any electric type attack that strikes them will always be redirected away from everything that could be possibly hurt internally, thus making the type completely immune to damage from electrical attacks. This serves as the crowning glory of the type and its biggest appeal in battle from a defensive position, and can more than make the Pokemon assigned to the type tough nuts to crack without something other than electric type offenses at one's disposal. As far as using the ground type in battle goes, it is definitely not a type that can be utilized to its full potential by novice trainers, as most ground types rely on something other than their ground type attributes for offense at a young age, and are thus better utilized by those that have a little bit of experience under their belt at the very least. These creatures, as mentioned before, are generally limited to physical attacks, and their stats reflect this, but this can work against them in many cases, as it can limit what types of offenses they can bring to a fight, even if range isn't a problem because many ground-type attacks can be executed from afar. The type also lacks a number of seriously powerful attacks to work with moves like Magnitude, Earthquake, and Precipice Blades being rare exceptions. These creatures tend to be decent to work with, but typically are only of average intelligence, and their capacity to safely interact with fellow teammates can literally be quite shaky, as some of the type's best moves, particularly Earthquake, have no moral compass and will hit anything and everything that gets caught in their pathway. Moreover, they are not always guaranteed to have strong defenses of both kinds to back them up, and their limited mobility can in turn render them sitting ducks against faster, more agile opponents. However, with all of this said, the type has a tremendous degree of move versatility to it, with many Pokemon assigned to the type having access to a variety of different offensive types, either naturally or artificially, such as through TMs or move tutors. In addition, The Pokemon assigned to this type are typically very hardy and can survive in some of the worst environmental conditions possible, allowing them to battle in nearly any type of environment, and they are further benefited in their accuracy, as a lot of the most powerful attacks of the type have extremely high accuracy rates and are thus certain to hit under normal circumstances. The ground type as a whole might not always prove to be the flashiest type to see in a fight, but the Pokemon assigned to it are still among the strongest of their kind and can prove to be versatile fighters that can more than be a handful and a weakness to many other Pokemon, cementing the type as one of the best as a whole offensively and definitely not something worth underestimating, especially given the ubiquitous nature of moves like Earthquake when taught artificially and when the terrain is just perfect for a bit of mudslinging and or triggering a seismic attack that can potentially level buildings if used correctly. Thank you all for watching this video. It is always an honor to be able to speak with you all on the subject of Pokemon in a way that brings me great joy and happiness in my work. If you would like to keep tabs on past and future work, click that subscribe button, check out my work on DeviantArt, and don't be shy about following me on Twitter, where you can find pertinent announcements on upcoming work before it is officially posted. Links to both can be found in the video description. If you would like to support my work and help Miguel and I continue to produce more content for you and improve upon our presentation, please visit us at my Patreon page, which you can also find a link to in the video description.
Yep, no.
With that, I thank you for watching and I wish you well.